Welcome to the Bend Don't Break podcast. I am Aaron Schweitzer, publisher of The Source Weekly and co-host of this podcast. I am joined by Nicole Vulcan, our editor. We are powered by The Source, of course, Bend's locally owned newspaper. Listeners tune in to find out how our community is dealing or not dealing with our ever-evolving new normal. Today, we are speaking with Eliza Wilson. She is the program manager of Grandma's House of Central Oregon for JBAR-J Youth Services. Eliza has lived in Central Oregon for the past 17 years. She has spent her career working with a variety of homeless service providers in Central Oregon and has been with JBAR-J Youth Services for the past 6 years. Having experienced homelessness as a child, Eliza became a client of JBAR-J's Cascade Youth and Family Center Loft program when she was a teen. Her experience as an advocate for homeless services started while she was living at the Loft and has given her the opportunity to speak locally in state government and nationally about her experience as a homeless youth. Eliza has also served as a board member of the Homeless Leadership Coalition for 6 years, and we are very grateful to have her on the program today, given the importance of homelessness in our community lately. Eliza, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it.
So Eliza, maybe we could just start by having you give us what you see as a general overview of the issues surrounding homelessness in our community right now.
Yeah, I think recently in this last year, there's been a lot of coverage around homelessness in the area. And I think a large part of that is just the visibility of the folks experiencing homelessness. A lot of people tend to congregate in central locations because, like us, they really need to have access to resources. And so I think that's a big part of why this has really been a hot topic for people. But really, like, I think our area, I think homelessness across the nation has been just growing because of the pandemic and our economy. But in our region here in Central Oregon, we really have high rent and low pay for a lot of just like working families and then folks who aren't able to work. Just having options for like affordable housing or low income housing, there just isn't enough here in Central Oregon.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, affordability is the thing that we think about first when we talk about this issue. What are some other barriers to getting people housed in the community?
Yeah, I think that's really individual based. I think there's really no type of person who experiences homelessness aside from housing, which it's this huge one, right? Affordable housing. Locally, I think some other barriers is just folks who need additional support besides just housing. Maybe they need some medical support or addiction support or mental health support to be successful in housing. So we definitely need additional services like that to support folks so that they can be stably housed, but just other types of barriers that keep people from being able to find housing. I think there's not really one avenue like for every person. We really need to have like a variety of services in the area, everything from like affordable housing to permanent supportive housing for people who are disabled.
Eliza, I can't pull myself away from going on to the Nextdoor app and reading about all of the misconceptions and just strange things that people say and believe about the homeless population. And I'm wondering if you could speak to maybe some of the common misconceptions that people have about the homeless population.
Yeah, I guess try to tell myself like understanding builds empathy. Like me personally, like having lived experience of homelessness, and when I hear and see those things, it sometimes really affects me because I think that generally people think that someone who's experiencing homelessness, like they all kind of fit in the same mold. They're an addict who chooses homelessness, which I don't really think that people choose to become homeless. I think that I think it's a social issue, right? So very similar to like racism, where lots of things feed like systemic racism, just like lots of things feed homelessness. Whether it's like the foster care system and people not having like stable places to come, like to go after leaving foster care and not having family support. Whether it's like trauma and abuse and neglect of children and them not having, stable families, veteran homelessness, elderly homelessness. I guess like there is no one face of homelessness, and in our region. I was just reading a stat that was put out yesterday by the Oregon Alliance on homelessness, and really they focus a lot on like families and youth who are experiencing homelessness. And the stat is that 51% of children who experience homelessness are under the age of 5.
Wow.
Yeah, I think people don't, they see what they see, right? And it's the folks who are standing on the side of the road, trying to get resources that way, for a place to stay or for food or other things. But that's not really the whole scope. There are a large number of seniors in our area who are experiencing homelessness. We know there's a large number of veterans, but just like families and children, single parents, and youth. Our youth, I think it's over 200% rise in youth homelessness in the past year in our region. So I think that just like understanding how that happens, I think is the first step. And to know that many of the people experiencing homelessness in our region are working full-time jobs, and trying to make ends meet and provide for their families, but cannot find housing. I mean, we see a lot of that too. So it's really not for lack of trying. And I think just there's lots of opportunities in our area to volunteer, at the Shepherd's House, like feeding the homeless, or the family kitchen. There's lots of organizations that you can do volunteer work if you're really concerned about homelessness issue and what feeds that issue.
Eliza, the one thing you brought up, I just wanted to pause on, was that lack of trying. And, as misconceptions go, that has to be the one that I see the most, is that pull yourself up by your bootstrap mentality. And that if there was just more GER there, then, they would really turn themselves around. How do you get across to people that, there's a little more going on there than motivation?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, like I work with youth, right, who are experiencing homelessness, and I sit in I go to a lot of meetings and public events where we're talking about youth homelessness. And that's not just something people say about about adult homelessness either. They say that about youth homelessness. Wow. We're talking about children under the age of 18. Well, how can they try harder? What are they not doing that they should be doing? Like, oh, they're not trying hard enough. And that's why this is happening. I think that we're trying to blame the person instead of blaming the true issues that lead to homelessness. It's just like blaming a person who's ill or like who has a mental illness. Well, they're not taking their meds, so they're not, like it. I don't know. I have a hard time with that, because just from my experience, when I was in high school and I was homeless off and on throughout my life as a child, like with my family, but then also as a teenager when I was in high school. And I was living in a trailer in the Walmart parking lot and did not have transportation to school, or running water or a way to wash my clothes, or necessarily like having like regular meals, but still making it to school somehow. And then ended up dropping out of school because I didn't have the transportation and the way to get to the place that I needed to be. So like there's so many situations like that where people, they're cold, they're hungry, they don't have a way to change their clothes or socks, or dry shoes, and they're still being blamed for lack of success. I guess it's just like, I think people need basic needs to be able to thrive and to like take steps forward.
Yeah.
And if they don't even have access to those things, and of course, like a service, I'm not saying service providers aren't doing so much work to support people in the community. And I think that's the main reason that the HLC is here and we're active and we're still doing the work this many years later, is because we want to bring those people together and the services together so that we can support folks the most we can, or the best way we can. But I think just like understanding what a person goes through when they're experiencing homelessness will build empathy, and we won't see that as much where people are saying, oh, well, they should be ticketed, or we should criminalize homelessness, because it is hard. And I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy to be homeless or to get out of it, you know?
Yeah, we definitely want to talk about the criminalization element and some activity around that in the community in just a little bit. I wanted to touch on camp sweeps a little bit before that. I know HLC has been present during some of the sweeps of encampments, and these are informal places like 2nd Street where folks have gathered with tents and perhaps RVs, and subsequently had those places swept. I know there's different ways to term that. So what has HLC's role been during these removals?
So you said the HLC was present at the sweeps. You mean our members? Some of our members were present?
That was my understanding, was that members of HLC have either been present or advised the city or the other entities such as ODOT when they're doing those sweeps. Just want to understand what's HLC's role there.
Yeah, I think that there was an article that came out that said that someone who is a member of HLC was advising ODOT. I think that was taken out of context a little bit. My understanding of that was taken out of context. Lots of our members, and myself being one of them, we sit on a lot of different boards and like groups in the community, workshops in the community to like talk about a shelter and the camps and safety and those types of things. So I think that my understanding of that was that in one of those meetings, ODOT was talking about their statewide, the sweeps that would be happening, and then spoke to someone who's a member of the HLC in that there was no planning around the sweeps from the HLC. The HLC doesn't participate in planning sweeps. And actually, we did come out with a letter and sent it out to our membership, and I think some other people around sweeps. As a board member of the HLC, we have to be really careful about. We have a broad, diverse group of members. Shelter providers, St. Charles, all sorts of like medical providers. There are so many people who are a member of the HLC. So when we come out as a board, we talk about like what should our response be to this. Really, the HLC, we're the continuum of care for our region, and so we have federal mandates. That's really our focus. But with this last camp removal from ODOT, we did come out with a letter just saying that we believe in creating long-term solutions for folks before removing them from land or from camps, because it does sever ties with providers who are coming there every week or multiple times a week to provide them resources. And a lot of times those folks like just kind of have to move to the next location, which is kind of what we saw happen with Emerson. When they were removed from Emerson, they moved to the ODOT land, and then they're moved again. And with winter coming, there is concern about folks being connected to service providers so that they can get the things that they need.
Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what you've seen. I think there is some, certainly I go again to some of the social media conversations that are confusing to me. And the idea being that if you sweep, then somehow that problem has been taken care of, because, they're no longer by the on-ramp. I don't see it. And somehow those people have miraculously now are employed and living in sheltered housing. What have you seen after the sweeps from an HLC's perspective? And what does that look like? What role does HLC play once all these people are basically put in flux?
Yeah. So I think it's kind of confusing. So the HLC, we meet regularly, and we try to provide education and support to the community of providers that do the real work, right? So we don't do direct care. Some of our members do. So I can only speak really from my outreach team. So I do oversee an outreach team for JBARJ who works with youth.
Sure.
And then have other outreach workers who are part of the membership. So I think what we've seen is what happens every time they do camp removals is that it's hard to find folks. Some of them, I heard in the last meeting I was in, like I think last week, some of the folks the providers haven't been able to contact since they were removed. And that's a concern, because a lot of those folks, they rely on those resources for things like heat and food and other items that they need. So that's really most of what I've heard. What was the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. There seems to be this misconception that somehow they're moving, like they're no longer in the region. And really what I'm hearing is it's really just that you lose contact with them for a prolonged period of time, but you end up seeing them again, I assume.
Yeah, that's just not the case. I think that it's just not understanding that if we remove people from camps, they aren't moving out of the area. And without referencing like your last podcast, so like I said in the beginning of this conversation, people congregate in central locations because that's where resources are, right? So just like us, like if we don't have transportation, we're gonna need to be close to a grocery store, close to the medical, or like close to town, close to the bus route, because we don't have a vehicle. So people just don't have the resources to leave the area if we remove them from a camp. These are people who are relying on us for resources. And many of them are disabled or, elderly or very young children. There were some young children who were in the camps that were removed. So people
Eliza,
are not, just like people aren't coming to Bend to be homeless, people are not leaving Bend to be homeless.
I wanted to ask something about that. I mean, this is a place where everyone, it appears, is trying to move here because we've got a nice quality of life, clear skies, mountains, beautiful things. It's not a surprise why people want to come here from the population in general. When it comes to people without addresses, some community members claim that offering more services just attracts more people without homes. What's your take on this notion? I know you just talked about it a little bit, but let's elaborate on it.
Yeah, that's just simply not true. We have data around that, and we, publicize it in a big way often. It's on our website, on the HLC website. Every year we do the point in time count, and we ask folks, every person that we can connect with who's experiencing homelessness, we ask them how long they've lived in Central Oregon, and like those types of questions. And it's just not true that people move here to be homeless. Like, I guess they don't move here for resources. There are other areas that do have more shelter than we have in our community. And that's not for lack of trying. I think the city of Bend and Shepherd's House, having the low barrier shelter, that's just, they're serving 70 to 83 people a night just this last week. And then all the work that's being done by Bethlehem Inn and Neighbor Impact to increase beds in Bend and Redmond. So that's not for lack of trying, but it's just definitely not true that these people are not from Central Oregon. I have to input data every day, and many of these people have been here longer than 10 years, for a long period of time. So
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Eliza,
keep hearing this notion of like, there's no away anymore. People want folks to go away, but you go into another community and the same things are happening there, which I don't know if people are aware that this is a nationwide
yeah,
concern.
and I've heard people say that, oh, I've gone to other cities and it's just not a problem there. Well, maybe they're just not in the area where people frequent in those cities, because I can tell you, as a service provider, we do strategize nationally with other service providers, and it's just not true. Homelessness is on the rise all across the country. It's not something the city of Bend is not doing. Although we would love to see like additional funds and those, I think the city is really trying to have those conversations. So I think there's a lot of good things happening to support the service providers and the folks who are experiencing homelessness. One of the things that doesn't do that is pretending that this is not a Bend issue, because it is. It's an everywhere issue.
Eliza, we did have the Bend Humanity Coalition on our previous podcast, and I know they're working to try to alleviate this problem as well, certainly from a different philosophical position. They're advocating for more enforcement of rules around public urination, intoxication, with the idea of discouraging people from living on the streets. What's your thoughts when you hear that kind of philosophy, or is that helpful? It certainly elevated the conversation. I think we can agree with that.
Right. Yeah. I think that I don't think it's helpful. I understand where that comes from, right? Like the idea that if we punish people for something, then maybe they won't do it. But I think that if people had other options, they wouldn't urinate outside, It's not something people are not sleeping outside because they want to. So punishing them, and especially if it's financially, it really just creates additional barriers for people and makes it harder for them. Just like we're saying, we don't want them where we see them. Like, we don't want to see them. They need to move where they used to be, or outside of town, or like if they could just move away or be in another part of town where we're not seeing them all the time. That's just creating also additional barriers, right? Because if they're further away from resources, it's going to be even harder for them to become housed. Just like if you ticket someone and say, oh, you owe us $100 because you're sleeping on the sidewalk, or we saw you peeing in public, there's still no bathroom for them to go to.
Right.
So I don't think it's not solving anything. And I just want to say, like, those in other cities where they do that, it is not just adults that they do that to. They do that to children as well. That like a 16-year-old who's experiencing homelessness, making it illegal for them to sit on the sidewalk or sleep on the sidewalk. There are a lot of super vulnerable people who are experiencing homelessness nationwide, but in our communities as well. Like I said, under children who are with their families, or unaccompanied children without guardians, the elderly. There are a lot of elderly folks who are experiencing homelessness in our community. And so, or people who are mentally ill or have chronic illnesses. And so I guess I don't understand that, the concept of making it harder for them.
Well, one thing I think is it moves in a way of the problem is somewhat intractable. And aren't you just in those situations moving people from social services to justice, the justice system? You're moving them essentially to either being in prison or giving a juvenile a record of some sort for some minor infraction they can't avoid, instead of actually taking those. And it's money either way, in my opinion. You're either you're either spending it on one side or the other, and I think that's one of the things that I'm hopeful about when we look at this situation, is maybe we do start thinking like, do you want to move this person into the juvenile system, or do you want to move them into a place where social services are provided for juveniles without houses? So
Right. I think that's such a good point, in that we're talking about, okay, so we're still going to be trying to provide services to people experiencing homelessness. So there's the tax dollars to do that. And then we're talking about using police time to ticket these folks or to arrest these folks. So that's additional tax money. And then to incarcerate them, which is additional. So you want to spend more money on the issue. Why don't we spend that money on things like housing and additional services for people that's, like low barrier services, or, meeting those folks where they're at to address trauma and the experiences that they've had while homeless. We're spending the money either way. So
yeah, I mean, I think there some studies about the cost of getting people housed versus all of these other things that are pretty clear that that track of housing first is actually the cheapest model.
Yes. Medical burden. People really suffer medically when they are experiencing homelessness.
Mm-hmm. Eliza, I wanted to ask you about the notion of the Joint Office of Homelessness. This is something that was floated by some Bend City councilors. The idea is, and please feel free to correct me, it sounds like, this is a government approach to essentially, kind of sounds like similar to what the HLC is doing. Can you just, inform listeners about your thought about that and how you think the two would work together?
Yeah, I think, so I sit on the emergency homelessness task force. So it wouldn't in any way replace the HLC, because the HLC is a mandate, like a federal mandate. So every region across the country has to have a continuum of care. So that is regional, right? So the Homeless Leadership Coalition is a regional approach to bringing folks together to address the needs of people experiencing homelessness, to provide education, do things like the PIT count, the point in time count, and then collect data and coordinated entry and all of those things that we are mandated to do by HUD. So that's our focus. A lot of times, there's other things, with such a broad issue, we're brought into other conversations. This joint office, so because we're regional, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Jefferson, Crook, and Deschutes counties, this joint office would be specifically Deschutes County and Bend. So it's very different. I think it's great that they're taking the initiative to have an office that's designated to addressing the concerns that service providers have, the public has. I hope what it does is it continues to educate our officials and the people making decisions around funding and support for people experiencing homelessness. Because really, we all, in order to make a decision and decide whether or not we're going to support service providers or what we're going to do about the issue, they really have to be educated about what it is to be homeless. So I think the more we can do around that, the better. And I'm really excited about them taking the time to do that.
Eliza, we've talked a lot about the issue in the broader sense. Maybe you could tell our listeners, viewers, readers, what specifically does Grandma's House do and the services you provide?
Yeah, Grandma's House is a shelter for pregnant and parenting teens in Central Oregon. So we will serve youth from all across the region, and we provide shelter for up to 2 years for the parents and their babies. We provide childbirth education classes, parenting classes, and we also provide, basic need items for anyone in need in the community for their children. So maternity clothes, women's clothing, baby clothing, diapers and wipes for anyone who has a child in need. And we also have formula, depending on like, what kind of formula your baby uses. And really, we get a ton of donations and stuff like that. So if someone has a need for their child, they can call Grandma's House and we'll try to fill that need. And yeah, Grandma's House has been in the community for about 30 years. And I actually lived at Grandma's House when I was a teen parent as well. So it's a really great organization that I feel really lucky to be a part of. And then I also work with JBarJ Youth Services, like over the street outreach program as well.
Great. And maybe just an insight into over the last year and a half, what does it look like to be running Grandma's House and the needs? How have the needs changed or grown, shrunk possibly within that period for our community?
Yeah, as a shelter provider, things kind of have changed in just having to keep just being mindful of COVID and trying to reduce the spread of COVID. So there's been a lot of things that we have to do. Like every time we have a positive COVID case, we've had, whether that's with staff or residents, we've had to shut down intakes. So we've definitely been able to serve less moms and babies, like for them staying in the shelter. We've definitely served more people in the community with like basic need items, but haven't been able to shelter as many because every time there's like a risk of COVID or there's COVID, we've had to stop intakes, which is it's pretty much the same with most shelters in the region. It's been hard with staffing. I think everyone's hiring. We see the hiring signs in every it doesn't matter, the hospital everywhere. And so that's been tough to just stay adequately staffed. When you're serving youth who are homeless, we have to have a ratio. So it's not like adult programs where we can have a couple staff and for 90 residents and call it good. For kids, it's really like one staff for every 4 young people in our program. So we have to be adequately staffed to provide shelter. It's been hard. It's been hard for young people. They feel isolated. And I think that's whether I'm talking about my own children or the children in our shelters. It was hard when schools were closed. Oh my goodness. Our staff, although they try to be teachers, they're not, well, one of them is actually, she's a teacher, retired teacher. But so I think we just kind of are doing the best we can, and that's all we can do. Just like most of us, just be kind and do the best we can.
Yeah. Eliza, you mentioned earlier, just starting to talk about, hey, let community members who are concerned, how about you volunteer? So before we wrap up today, we just have a few minutes left. What does the community without homes need most right now, and how can community members help?
Yeah, I think that there's so many great organizations to volunteer with, whether you want to volunteer your time or donate to those organizations. I think, as if you're a concerned community member, we try, when we hear about organizations, we try to connect with them and get them to be involved in the HLC so that we can really support them in supporting our unhoused neighbors. I think that those folks, what they need is understanding and support. So whether that's connecting with one of our members, there's lots of great members doing things in the community for folks. So whether it's our street outreach program at JBarJ or the Shepherd's House, I know they always need meals for their shelter, their low barrier shelter. Grandma's House just did a meal for them last week and dropped some off. So I was just trying to like help each other. People always need socks, clean socks. So donating, I think on every website. So on our website, Grandma's House website, we have a wish list. I know Bethlehem Inn always needs things for their folks, and the outreach workers do as well. So just connecting with any of them. We have a lot of great people doing that work in the community and talking to them about what they see the need is. Because I think we all want to do, especially around the holidays, people want to do a lot of good things for people, but they don't really know where to go. So connect with one of the resources in Bend or Central Oregon, and I'm sure they'd be able to steer them the right way.
Well, we have also, I can insert here our plug for centraloregongives.com and .org. You can give directly to Grandma's House and JBAR Youth Services. And this week, you'll get a glass of home kombucha.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Well, this has been such a pleasure to hear from you and hear about your story and about the work you're doing. It's so inspiring, really, just to know that there's so many folks out there who really care about the issue and are doing great work.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it. And if people want to get involved or they want to collaborate, I think it's really important for, we want you. The HLC wants you as a member. We want to support you and connect you with other people doing the work so that we're not reinventing the wheel all the time and we're working together to do the best we can for those folks.
That's great. Eliza, thanks for being here. This has been the Bend Don't Break podcast with Eliza Wilson, Program Manager of Grandma's House of Central Oregon for JBAR Youth Services. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.